Growing up, my mom, Lila, was my entire world. She had me when she was just 20, and for most of my childhood, it was just the two of us navigating life together. My grandparents, Anna and Frank, were always in the background, stepping in whenever mom needed help, but it always felt like mom and I were a team. She worked tirelessly to give me a good life, and even though we didn't have much, I never doubted that I was loved. When I scraped my knee, she'd kiss it better. When I brought home an A on a test, she'd make me my favorite spaghetti as a reward. She used to tell me, "It's you and me against the world, Zoe." For years, I believed her. I thought our bond was unshakable. I thought she was my hero. Everything changed the day she met Mark. Mark was older than her by about a decade, charming in that smooth, practiced way that made everyone in the room pay attention to him. He was successful, well-dressed, and always seemed to know exactly what to say to make people like him. I'll admit, at first I liked him too. Mom seemed so happy around him, lighter, like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders anymore. After years of watching her struggle, I wanted to believe that Mark was the answer to her prayers. But once they got married, things began to shift. At first, it was subtle. I started noticing how she spent more time with Mark than with me. Family movie nights turned into date nights. Sunday morning pancake rituals were replaced with brunches for two. It stung, but I tried to brush it off. She deserved to be happy, and if Mark made her happy, I could live with that. Then Ella and Owen came along. The twins were adorable, of course, with their matching dimples and chubby cheeks. I loved them right away, but it didn't take long for me to realize that my place in the family was changing. Suddenly, everything revolved around them, their feedings, their naps, their milestones. I went from being the center of Mom's universe to an afterthought. I tried to adapt. I babysat when she needed a break, helped with diaper changes, and tried to be the supportive big sister. But no matter how much I pitched in, it never felt like enough. Mark started making comments about how I needed to pull my weight or stop being so difficult. Mom, who used to defend me against anything, started agreeing with him. When I turned 16, the shift became impossible to ignore. One night after dinner, Mom sat me down at the kitchen table. She wouldn't meet my eyes, and her hands were trembling as she pushed a glass of water toward me. "Zoe," she started, her voice soft but strained, "you know we love you, right?" My stomach dropped. "What's going on?" She took a deep breath, glancing toward the hallway where Mark was standing with his arms crossed. "It's just things have gotten really tight around here. With the twins, and Mark's job being so demanding, we just don't have the resources to support everyone. You're almost an adult now, and I think it's time you start thinking about your future." "What are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew. She looked down at her hands. "You need to move out. It's just too much, Zoe. We don't have the space or the energy to give you what you need. But you'll be fine, you're strong. And you can stay with your grandparents. They'll take care of you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words didn't make sense. "You're kicking me out?" I finally managed to say. "It's not like that," she said quickly, her voice breaking. I can't do this anymore. I'm trying my best, Zoe, but there's only so much I can handle. You'll understand someday." Mark chimed in from a hallway. "It's what's best for everyone," he said. "You'll have more stability with Anna and Frank, and we'll have the breathing room we need. It's a win-win. Win-win." The phrase made me want to scream. Within a week, I was packing up my life into a few cardboard boxes. Mom didn't even help. She just hovered by the door, holding Ella on her hip and telling me she'd visit soon. "This isn't goodbye," she said with a forced smile. But it felt like it. My grandparents, bless them, welcomed me with open arms. They didn't say much about the situation, but I could see the anger simmering beneath their polite smiles. Grandpa's jaw tightened every time Mom's name came up, and Grandma was always a little too quick to change the subject. I tried to settle into my new life, but the hurt lingered. How could the woman who used to call me her little sunshine throw me away so easily? How could she choose Mark and the twins over me? Those questions haunted me for years, and deep down, I think they still do. Moving in with my grandparents was both a blessing and a challenge. Anna and Frank were my anchors in the storm, offering me the stability I desperately needed after being pushed out of my own home. But they were retired and living off their savings, which meant I had to be mindful not to burden them financially. I was grateful for their love and support, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that I had to prove I could handle this on my own. I got a part-time job at a local diner, working evening shifts after school. It wasn't glamorous, dealing with cranky customers and cleaning sticky tables, but it was steady work, and the tips helped me scrape together enough to cover my own expenses. Between work and school, my schedule became a juggling act. I'd stay up late finishing assignments, then wake up early to help Grandma with errands before heading off to class. My grades, once a source of pride, began to suffer. I couldn't study as much as I used to, and the exhaustion was constant. Still, I refused to let go of my goal. College was my ticket to independence, my chance to build a future where I'd never have to rely on anyone, least of all Mom or Mark. It was the one thing keeping me going, even on the hardest days. As I settled into my new life, I held on to the faint hope that Mom might come around. At first, I tried to keep in touch, sending her texts and emails. They were simple messages, updates about school, questions about how she and the twins were doing. But she never replied. Birthdays came and went without a card or even a phone call. Christmas, once filled with matching pajamas and movie marathons, passed in silence. By the time my high school graduation rolled around, I knew better than to expect her to show up. Still, some small part of me hoped. I scanned the crowd that day, searching for her face among the sea of parents and families. But she wasn't there. Later, when I checked social media, I saw why. She'd posted photos of a family trip to Disney World, Mark, Ella, Owen, and her all grinning in front of Cinderella's castle. The caption read, "Making memories with my loves." Seeing those pictures felt like a punch to the gut. I was no longer part of her memories or her loves. She had erased me from her life so completely that it was as if I had never existed. Despite the pain, I poured myself into preparing for college. My grandparents were my cheerleaders, encouraging me at every step. Grandpa would quiz me on potential interview questions for scholarships, while Grandma helped me research programs that fit my budget. I applied to every scholarship I could find, filling out forms late into the night and writing essay after essay. I even picked up extra shifts at the diner to save as much as I could. When I finally got my acceptance letter from a decent state school, I cried for the first time in months. I had done it, but even as I packed my bags for college, I couldn't shake the weight of her absence. I wanted to call her, to tell her about my plans, but the memory of her silence held me back. She didn't care when I graduated, so why would she care about this? Still, a small part of me couldn't help wondering, would she ever regret leaving me behind? Did she think about me at all, or had I truly been replaced? Starting college was both terrifying and exhilarating. I threw myself into my studies, determined to prove to myself, and maybe even to her, that I was capable of succeeding on my own. I made friends, joined a few clubs, and even found an internship in my second year that helped me build connections in my field. But no matter how far I moved forward, there was always a shadow following me, the ghost of the relationship I once had with my mother. I carried the weight of her rejection like a stone in my chest, wondering if it would ever go away. For now, all I could do was keep moving, one step at a time. Life after college had been a journey of healing and self-discovery. By the time I landed my first full-time job in tech, I felt like I was finally stepping into a version of myself I could be proud of. My apartment wasn't huge, but it was mine, filled with secondhand furniture and thrift store finds I'd lovingly pieced together. For the first time in years, I had peace. No more walking on eggshells, no more wondering when the rug would be pulled out from under me. My grandparents had been my biggest cheerleaders throughout the journey. Grandpa always reminded me to take pride in every step, while Grandma made sure to send care packages even when I told her I didn't need anything. I didn't realize how much their unwavering support had steadied me until I finally felt grounded. Mom and Mark? They were a distant memory, or so I thought. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when the knock came. I'd just finished eating dinner and was halfway through folding laundry, a true picture of domestic bliss. At first, I thought it was my neighbor coming to borrow sugar again, but when I opened the door, I froze. There they were, Mom and Mark, standing side by side like ghosts from a past I'd worked hard to bury. Mom looked older, though still polished, her hair dyed to perfection. Mark, ever the suit-wearing charmer, had aged too, though his expression was more calculating than I remembered. "Zoe," Mom said, her voice soft and unnervingly warm, like she was trying to slip back into a role she'd abandoned years ago. "You look amazing. Can we come in?" Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to slam the door and pretend this wasn't happening. But curiosity, mixed with a sliver of hope, got the better of me. Maybe, just maybe, they were here to apologize, to finally acknowledge the pain they'd caused. I stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. They took in the apartment with slow, appraising glances. Mom ran her hand along the back of the sofa, while Mark nodded approvingly at the framed diploma on the wall. "You've done well for yourself," Mom said, her tone almost proud. I felt a flicker of pride, a tiny part of me hoping they'd finally seen my worth. "Thanks," I said cautiously, gesturing for them to sit. As soon as they settled on the couch, though, I noticed the change in their demeanor. The warmth faded, replaced by something calculated, almost rehearsed. Mark was the first to speak. "Ella and Owen are graduating soon," he began, his tone serious. "It's an exciting time for the family." I nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. "That's great. Congrats to them." Mom leaned forward, her smile tight. "We've been looking at colleges for them, but as you know, tuition is expensive. And with 2 kids at once, well, it's a lot to manage." I frowned, still not following. "Okay, and—" Mark's expression hardened slightly, as though I wasn't catching on fast enough. "We were thinking," he said, his voice dropping, "that you could help out. You've done so well for yourself, Zoe. It's only fair you give back to the family that raised you." I blinked, sure I'd misheard him. "You're joking, right?" Mom shook her head, her face unervingly serious. "You're in such a good place now, Zoe. And you know how much we've sacrificed over the years. We gave you everything we could." I let out a sharp laugh, the absurdity of her words hitting me like a slap. "Everything you could? You kicked me out, Mom. You told me I didn't belong in your new family. Now you want me to pay for Ella and Owen's college? You have got to be kidding me." Mom's smile vanished, her face hardening. "We did what we had to do, Zoe. You don't understand the pressure we were under back then. But look at you now, it worked out, didn't it? You're successful, you're independent. You wouldn't be here if it weren't for us." "Are you serious right now?" I asked, my voice rising. "I'm here because of Anna and Frank, not you. They picked up the pieces after you threw me away. I built this life on my own, and you had nothing to do with it." Mark leaned forward, his tone icy. "We're not asking for much, Zoe. Just a little support. It's time to pay it forward. Family takes care of family." "Family?" I spat, unable to contain my anger any longer. "You abandoned me. I wasn't part of your family when you kicked me out, and I'm not part of it now. You don't get to show up after a decade and demand anything from me." The tension in the room was suffocating. Mom looked like she wanted to cry, but there was an edge to it, like she was more angry than hurt. "You're being selfish," she said, her voice trembling. "We're your family, Zoe. You owe us." "I don't owe you anything," I said firmly, standing up. "And I think it's time for you to leave." Mark glared at me, but Mom grabbed his arm, pulling him to his feet. "This isn't over," she said, her voice cold. As the door closed behind them, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. Anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite place. Was it relief? Or the sting of finality? Whatever it was, I knew one thing for certain. They hadn't come to make amends. They'd come to take. And I wasn't giving them a damn thing. After Mom and Mark stormed out of my apartment, I sat on the couch, my heart racing and hands trembling. The nerve of them, to show up after all these years and act like I owed them something. The audacity was mind-boggling. I replayed the conversation in my head, trying to make sense of it, but the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. They'd abandoned me, replaced me, and now they wanted me to clean up their mess? I told myself it was over, that I'd stood my ground, and they'd gotten the message. But of course, it wasn't over. The calls started the next day. At first, it was Mom, leaving voicemails that began with a forced sweetness before devolving into guilt trips. "Zoe, sweetheart," she said in the first one, "I know we didn't leave things on the best terms, but I need you to think about your siblings. They're just kids, Zoe. They deserve the same opportunities you had." The second voicemail was less polite. "I can't believe how selfish you're being. We raised you, Zoe. We gave you everything we had. Is this really how you want to repay us?" By the third voicemail, her tone was dripping with venom. "You're ungrateful, just like I always suspected. After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat your family? You're disgusting." Mark wasn't much better. His messages were colder, more calculated, like he was trying to intimidate me. "You're making a mistake, Zoe," he said in one. "Family doesn't abandon each other. You're better than this." I blocked both their numbers, but they found other ways to reach me. Mom started calling my grandparents, weaving a sob story about how I'd turned my back on her and my poor siblings. She came to us crying. Grandma told me one afternoon, her voice filled with a mix of anger and concern. talking about how much she sacrificed for you and how she doesn't understand why you're being so cruel. And what did you say? I asked, bracing myself. I told her she had some nerve showing up after all this time and that she needed to leave you alone, Grandma said firmly. But she just kept going on and on about how you owe her. It was like talking to a brick wall. Hearing that made me feel both grateful and guilty. My grandparents had already done so much for me, and now they were being dragged into this mess. Things escalated quickly after that. Mom started spreading her version of events to anyone who would listen, painting me as a selfish, ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her family in their time of need. Mutual acquaintances, distant relatives, even some old friends started reaching out to me, parroting her words. I heard what happened. One old high school friend texted me. I can't believe you're refusing to help your siblings. That's so messed up, Zoe. I stared at the message, my blood boiling. I wanted to respond, to set the record straight, but what was the point? The people who truly knew me wouldn't believe her lies, and the ones who sided with her weren't worth my time. Despite my attempts to ignore it, the pressure started to wear on me. I couldn't scroll through social media without seeing posts from distant relatives chiming in on how family should always come first, or vague statuses clearly aimed at me. One post from Mom stopped me in my tracks. It was a picture of Ella and Owen holding acceptance letters, their smiles wide and hopeful. The caption read, "Proud of my babies. Just wish certain people would remember the importance of family. Hashtag priorities, hashtag do the right thing." The comments were full of sympathy. They deserve the world, one person wrote. Some people just don't know the meaning of family, said another. It was infuriating. She was using her kids as pawns, dragging my name through the mud in the process. The final straw came when Mark showed up at my workplace. I was in the middle of a meeting when the receptionist called, her voice uneasy. "There's a man here asking for you," she said. "He says it's urgent." I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. "What's his name?" "Mark," she replied. I felt a rush of anger, but also a twinge of panic. "Tell him I'm not available," I said firmly. "He's not leaving," she said, hesitating. "Should I call security?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Please do." Security escorted him out, but the damage was done. Word spread quickly around the office, and I had to field questions for the rest of the day about the incident in the lobby. It was humiliating, but more than that, it was the wake-up call I needed. They weren't going to stop. If I didn't draw a hard line now, they would bulldoze their way back into my life, bringing their chaos with them. That night, I sat down and made a choice. I was done. No more calls, no more explanations, no more trying to defend myself. I had worked too hard to build a life of peace and stability, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me. Let them talk. Let them spread their lies. I knew the truth, and the people who mattered knew it too. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. And I sure as hell didn't owe them a single thing. I had hoped that after my firm refusal and shutting the door on Mom and Mark, they would take the hint and leave me alone. But I should have known better. Mom had always been relentless when she wanted something, and this time was no exception. The voicemails became a near-daily occurrence. At first, they were laced with the same guilt-tripping rhetoric I'd come to expect. "Zoe, I don't understand how you can be so heartless," Mom's voice would drone. "This isn't who I raised you to be." Then they grew more pointed. "I hope you realize you're tearing this family apart. Your siblings will never forgive you for this." Mark chimed in occasionally, too, though his approach was more threatening than emotional. "If you think you can just shut us out and pretend we don't exist, think again," he said in one message. "Family isn't something you can walk away from, Zoe." I ignored them, hoping they would eventually get tired of talking to a brick wall. Instead, they doubled down. One evening, I stopped by my grandparents' house for dinner, and as soon as I walked in, I could tell something was wrong. Grandma was unusually quiet, her hands trembling as she stirred the pot of soup on the stove. Grandpa, seated at the kitchen table, was visibly tense, his jaw clenched. "What's going on?" I asked, setting my bag down. Grandpa looked up at me, his eyes heavy with frustration. "Your mother was here," he said. My stomach sank. What did she want? To guilt-trip us into taking her side, Grandma said, her voice uncharacteristically sharp. "She showed up crying, saying you'd turned her back on her and your siblings, begging us to talk some sense into you." "And what did you tell her?" I asked cautiously. Grandpa straightened in his chair, his voice firm. "We told her the truth. That she has no right to expect anything from you after abandoning you when you needed her the most." Hearing that filled me with gratitude, but also guilt. I'm so sorry they dragged you into this, I said, sitting down across from him. You shouldn't have to deal with this because of me. Grandpa shook his head. Don't apologize. This isn't your fault. And don't you dare let them make you feel like you owe them anything, Zoe. You've worked too hard to let them bully you. Grandma nodded in agreement. She made her bed a long time ago. Now she has to lie in it. But Mom wasn't done. A few days later, things escalated further. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a series of text messages. Glancing at my screen, I saw they were for Mom, and the tone was angrier than ever. The first message read, "You think you're so much better than us now? Don't forget where you came from, Zoe. You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for me." The next one hit like a sucker punch. "You think you can just walk away from your family? We'll see what the court has to say about that." I froze, staring at the words. Court? My heart started racing as a dozen worst-case scenarios ran through my mind. Were they actually threatening legal action? For what? I didn't owe them a penny, and there was no legal basis for any claim they might try to make. But the fact that they would even go there, that they were willing to stoop so low, left me shaken. I put my phone down and took a few deep breaths, trying to steady myself. This wasn't about money or family. It was about control. That evening, I called my grandparents to tell them about the texts. Grandpa's response was immediate. "It's an empty threat," he said confidently. "They have no case, and they know it. They're just trying to scare you." "Still," Grandma added, "it might be worth consulting a lawyer, just in case. You can't trust them to play fair." The thought of involving a lawyer felt extreme, but as I sat in my apartment that night, replaying the texts in my head, I realized they might be right. This wasn't going to stop on its own. Mom and Mark were determined to bulldoze their way back into my life, and they didn't care who they hurt in the process. If I didn't stand my ground now, they'd only keep pushing. The next day, I made an appointment with a lawyer. I'd been on edge ever since Mom's texts about legal action, but I didn't expect her next move to be so bold or so humiliating. It was a typical Tuesday morning at work, the kind where you lose yourself in emails and meetings and the hours fly by. I was in a strategy meeting with my team, halfway through outlining a proposal, when my phone buzzed. Normally, I would have ignored it, but the receptionist's name flashing on the screen gave me pause. "Excuse me," I said, stepping out into the hallway. Her voice was low and uneasy. "Zoe, there's a woman here asking for you. She says she's your mother." I froze, my stomach twisting. "What? Are you sure?" "She's insistent," the receptionist said. Well, she's not leaving." I wanted to sink through the floor. "Tell her I'm unavailable," I said quickly, hoping that would be the end of it. There was a long pause before the receptionist replied. She said she'll wait. I braced myself as I walked to the lobby, trying to summon some semblance of composure. The sight that greeted me made my blood boil. Mom stood in the center of the room, arms crossed, radiating indignation. A few of my coworkers were lingering nearby, blatantly pretending not to eavesdrop. The receptionist gave me an apologetic look as I stepped into the awkward scene. "Zoe," Mom called out, her voice echoing across the lobby. "Finally, you've been ignoring me for weeks." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my voice low and steady. "You need to leave," I said firmly. "No, we need to talk," she said, stepping closer. Her voice was sharp, but there was a theatrical edge to it, like she wanted everyone to hear her. "You can't just shut me out, Zoe. After everything I've done for you, you owe me a conversation." I could feel the heat rising to my face as the murmurs around us grew louder. "This isn't the place for this," I said, glancing around at the growing audience. "You're making a scene." "Oh, I'm making a scene?" she snapped, her voice dripping with mockery. "I wouldn't have to make a scene if you'd just answer my calls. But no, you're too busy playing the high and mighty career woman to deal with your own family." Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. But more than anger, I felt embarrassment. My coworkers, people I'd worked hard to impress, were watching this unfold like a reality TV episode. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a hiss. "You need to leave. Now." She ignored me, her voice rising even louder. "You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? Just because you have a fancy job and a nice apartment? You wouldn't have any of it if it weren't for me." My patience snapped. "You abandoned me," I shot back, my voice shaking with anger. "You threw me out like I didn't matter. You don't get to show up here and act like I owe you anything." By now, the lobby was silent except for her tirade. I saw one coworker subtly pull out their phone, clearly recording the drama. The thought of this circulating around the office made me want to crawl into a hole, but there was no stopping her now. "You're pathetic," Mom spat, her eyes narrowing. "Ungrateful and pathetic. You think you've won? Let me tell you something, Zoe. You'll never be better than me. No matter how much money you make, no matter how far you run, you're still just a selfish little girl who doesn't know the meaning of family. Leave," I said again, louder this time, "or I'll call security." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression a mix of fury and disbelief. Then she let out a bitter laugh and finally turned to leave. "You're a lost cause, Zoe," she muttered under her breath as she walked out the door. The moment she was gone, I rushed to the bathroom, my hands shaking as adrenaline coursed through me. I locked the door and leaned against the sink, trying to catch my breath. My reflection stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed, a mix of anger and humiliation written all over my face. By the time I returned to my desk, the whispers had already started. People avoided making eye contact, but I could feel their curiosity radiating toward me. One coworker had the nerve to ask, "Everything okay?" Looked intense out there. "It's fine," I said curtly, pretending to dive into an email. But it wasn't fine. The public spectacle had left me shaken, not just because of the embarrassment, but because it showed just how far Mom was willing to go to control me. This wasn't just about money or pride anymore. It was about power, and I was starting to realize she'd do whatever it took to get it. It had been a week since the scene at my office, and I was just beginning to feel like I could breathe again when the letter arrived. It was a plain white envelope with no return address, which should have been my first clue. When I opened it and started reading, my stomach dropped. The letter was from a lawyer representing my mother and Mark. It demanded that I contribute to Ella and Owen's college fund, citing some vague concept of familial obligations. It even hinted that if I refused, they'd pursue legal action to enforce their claim. The language was filled with passive-aggressive accusations, implying that I'd benefited from my family's sacrifices and now had a duty to give back. I read the letter 3 times, my anger building with each pass. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. There was no legal basis for their demands, I knew that much, but the fact that they'd gone so far as to involve lawyers felt like a calculated attempt to intimidate me. I called my grandparents that evening, venting my frustrations as I paced around my apartment. "They're out of their minds," I said, waving the letter in the air as though they could see it through the phone. "Do they really think they can force me to pay for Ella and Owen's college?" Grandpa let out a long sigh. "It's a scare tactic, Zoe. They're trying to wear you down." "Don't let them bully you," Grandma chimed in. "They know they don't have a leg to stand on, but they're hoping you'll cave to avoid the hassle." The thought of caving made my stomach churn. "I don't even know how to respond to this," I admitted, sitting down on the edge of my couch. Should I ignore it? Fight back? What if they actually try to take this to court? Grandpa's voice was firm. "You need to call a lawyer. Get someone on your side who can shut this nonsense down before it goes any further." The next day, I did just that. The lawyer I consulted was a no-nonsense woman named Rebecca, who immediately put me at ease. She reviewed the letter and confirmed what I already suspected. "They don't have a case," she said bluntly. "There's no law that obligates you to pay for your siblings' college tuition, and any judge would see this for what it is, a frivolous attempt to manipulate you." Her reassurance was a relief, but it didn't erase the knot of anxiety in my chest. "What do I do next?" I asked. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against the desk. "You have a few options. You can ignore them entirely, though that might provoke them to escalate further. You could send a response through me, firmly stating that their demands are baseless and that any further harassment will result in legal action on your part." I hesitated, then asked, "What about a restraining order? Is that too extreme?" Rebecca didn't flinch. "Not at all. Given the pattern of harassment showing up at your workplace, involving your grandparents, and now this letter, you'd have a strong case for one. It's your call, but if you want to protect your peace of mind, it might be worth considering." The idea of a restraining order felt drastic, even though a part of me knew it might be necessary. Mom and Mark weren't just being unreasonable, they were relentless. That night, I mulled over my options. Ignoring them seemed like the simplest route, but I knew it wouldn't make them stop. A response from Rebecca might shut them down, but it might also provoke them to escalate further. And a restraining order? That felt like crossing a line I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder how it had come to this. How had the woman who once called me her little sunshine turned into someone willing to drag me through the mud for money? How had my family become a source of so much pain and chaos? I didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep living like this. It was time to draw a line in the sand. The next morning, I called Rebecca and told her to draft a formal response. "Make it clear that I won't tolerate any more harassment," I said. "And let them know I'm prepared to take legal action if they don't back off." "Consider it done," she said. As I hung up, I felt a small sense of relief, like I was finally taking control of the situation. But deep down, I knew this was far from over. Mom and Mark weren't the type to back down easily, and something told me they had more tricks up their sleeves. The harassment had gone from unbearable to dangerous. After the legal letter from Mom and Mark's lawyer, I thought they might take a step back, but I underestimated just how relentless they could be. The final straw came one Friday evening when Mom showed up at my apartment, banging on the door with enough force to make my neighbors peek out of their units. "Zoe," she screamed, her voice muffled but still piercing. "I know you're in there. Stop ignoring me and let me in." I froze, heart pounding, unsure of what to do. I considered calling the police, but before I could reach for my phone, the yelling continued. "You're not going to get away with this, Zoe," she shouted. "You think you can just abandon your family? Open this door right now, or I swear." Her threats were interrupted by my neighbor, Mr. Peterson, an older man who always seemed to be looking for a reason to get involved in building drama. "Hey lady," he barked. "Knock it off, or I'm calling the cops." That seemed to snap her out of it. She muttered something I couldn't make out and stormed off, slamming the stairwell door behind her. I stood there for a moment, trembling, before finally locking my deadbolt and sinking onto the floor. This had to stop. The next morning, I called Rebecca. "I can't do this anymore," I told her, my voice shaking. She showed up at my apartment last night, screaming and threatening me. "I think she's losing it." Rebecca didn't hesitate. "It's time to file for a restraining order," she said. The process was surprisingly straightforward, but emotionally draining. I had to recount every incident, the calls, the texts, the scene at my workplace, the letter from their lawyer, and now the confrontation at my apartment. Each event felt like a fresh wound as I put it into words, but Rebecca reassured me that the more evidence we had, the stronger our case would be. A week later, I found myself in a small, sterile courtroom, staring across the room at my mother and Mark. Seeing her there, glaring at me with a mixture of anger and disbelief, felt surreal. She didn't look like the woman who used to braid my hair or cheer me on at school recitals. She looked like a stranger. The judge listened patiently as Rebecca laid out the case, presenting the mountain of evidence we'd compiled. My mom's lawyer tried to downplay her actions, framing them as emotional outbursts from a mother desperate to reconnect with her child. But the judge wasn't buying it. When it was my turn to speak, I told the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I tried to maintain a relationship with her after she abandoned me, I said, my voice steady but strained. But she made it clear I wasn't part of her family anymore. Now she's harassing me because she thinks I owe her something. I just want to live my life in peace. The judge granted the restraining order, barring both Mom and Mark from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace. Relief washed over me, but it was bittersweet. As I left the courtroom, I caught one last look at Mom. She was seething, her face red with fury. "You've destroyed this family, Zoe," she hissed as I walked past her. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But as I drove home, a heavy sadness settled over me. This wasn't how I wanted things to end. A part of me had always hoped for reconciliation, for some kind of closure. But now, it felt like that door had slammed shut for good. I told myself it was for the best. After everything she'd put me through, I couldn't afford to let her back into my life. But the ache in my chest told a different story, a quieter, more painful truth. Sometimes, losing family isn't a choice. Sometimes, it's survival. The restraining order was supposed to bring closure, and in some ways it did. Mom and Mark stopped calling, and there were no more surprise visits or dramatic confrontations at my apartment or workplace. For the first time in months, I could go about my day without looking over my shoulder, without bracing myself for the next attack. But the peace was bittersweet. The damage they'd caused didn't simply disappear with the court's decision. My grandparents, Anna and Frank, bore the brunt of Mom's fury after the restraining order was issued. She couldn't contact me directly anymore, so she funneled her anger toward them, showing up at their home unannounced and berating them for enabling my selfishness. "She's out of control, Zoe," Grandpa told me one evening over the phone, his voice tired. "I don't know what she's hoping to accomplish, but it's like she won't stop until she breaks someone." I'm so sorry, Grandpa, I said, the guilt weighing heavily on my chest. You shouldn't have to deal with this because of me. This isn't your fault, Grandma chimed in. She's always been like this, demanding, manipulative. We just didn't see it clearly until now. Hearing them say that was both validating and heartbreaking. I hated that they were stuck in the middle of this mess, forced to deal with the fallout from decisions that weren't theirs to make. While my grandparents stood by me, Mom's friends and extended family rallied behind her. She spun a sob story about how I'd turned my backs on her, painting herself as the heartbroken mother desperate to reconnect with her estranged daughter. Social media became her stage, each post a carefully curated jab at my character. One day, out of morbid curiosity, I broke my rule and checked her Facebook page. The top post was a picture of Ella and Owen standing by a college campus sign. The caption read, "Even when others let you down, a mother's love never wavers. So proud of my babies for thriving despite the odds. Hashtag family first, hashtag never give up." The comments were predictably infuriating. "You're such a strong mom," one person wrote. "Your kids are lucky to have you." Another added, "Some people don't understand the meaning of family. You're better off without them." I closed the app, my stomach twisting. The lies she was spreading were bad enough, but the fact that people believed her, people who didn't know the full story, was worse. It felt like a second betrayal, one that I couldn't fight back against without dragging myself further into the mud. So, I stopped checking social media altogether. I deleted the apps from my phone, blocked anyone who tried to message me about family drama, and decided to focus on the people who actually mattered. Through it all, Daniel remained my anchor. We'd been together for 2 years by that point, and he'd seen every phase of my journey, from the cautious optimism of our early days to the chaos that Mom and Mark had unleashed. "You don't owe them anything," he reminded me one evening as we sat on the couch, sharing a pizza. "You've worked too hard to let them drag you back into their chaos." "I know," I said, though the guilt still lingered. "It's just hard. Cutting off your own mom isn't something they prepare you for." He reached for my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You didn't cut her off. She made her choices. All you did was protect yourself." His words were a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't the villain in this story, no matter how much Mom tried to make me feel like one. As the weeks turned into months, the noise from Mom's camp began to fade. The restraining order had done its job, and even her social media tirades became less frequent. But the scars remained. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd lost something irreparable. Not just my relationship with Mom, but a part of myself. The hopeful, trusting version of me who once believed in unconditional love was gone, replaced by someone more guarded, more cautious. Even now, surrounded by the life I'd built for myself, a loving boyfriend, a supportive circle of friends, and a career I was proud of, I couldn't help but feel the ache of what could have been. Sometimes I wondered if she ever felt it too. Now, as I sit in my quiet apartment, a cup of tea cooling in my hands, I can't help but replay the last few years in my mind. The chaos, the heartbreak, the constant tug-of-war between wanting to belong and needing to protect myself. It feels like I've lived a lifetime in the span of a few months. Did I make the right choices? It's a question that lingers, one I may never fully answer. Cutting off my own mother feels unnatural, like breaking a fundamental law of nature. Families are supposed to stick together, right? They're supposed to fight and forgive, to love unconditionally. That's the narrative we're fed, the one I clung to for so long. But at what point does unconditional love become self-destruction? As much as I try to rationalize my decisions, the guilt still creeps in at the edges. Part of me still yearns for the family I thought I had. The mom who used to braid my hair before school, who made pancakes on Sunday mornings and called me her little sunshine. Sometimes, I wonder if that version of her was ever real, or if it was just a fantasy I created to survive the harder parts of my childhood. In the quieter moments, I let myself feel the grief for what I've lost. Not just my relationship with Mom, but the hope that it could ever be what I wanted it to be. That hope was a lifeline for so many years, but holding on to it came at a cost, one I'm only now beginning to understand. It's not just about Mom, either. Cutting ties with her has meant losing connections with people who used to feel like family, relatives, childhood friends, even people I barely knew who have taken her side. The isolation is real, even if it's necessary. But through the grief, there's also a quiet sense of liberation. For the first time, I'm living a life that feels like mine. I'm not answering to her demands, bending to her manipulations, or second-guessing my every move out of fear of her judgment. My choices are my own now, and that's something no one can take from me. Daniel has been my rock through all of this, but even he can't fully understand what it's like to lose a parent who's still alive. He tries, though, and I love him for that. "You're the strongest person I know," he told me the other night as we sat on the couch, the TV humming softly in the background. "You didn't just survive what she put you through. You built something incredible out of it." I want to believe him. Some days I do. Other days, I feel like I'm still carrying the weight of her rejection, the ache of knowing that no matter what I achieve, it'll never be enough for her. But maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not about being enough for her or anyone else. Maybe it's about being enough for me. I don't know if I'll ever fully heal from this. I don't know if there's a version of the future where I can think of Mom without feeling that familiar sting of betrayal. But what I do know is that I've come too far to go back. For now, I'm focusing on the life I've built, the career I've worked so hard for, the love I've found with Daniel, the quiet evenings in my apartment where I can finally just be. It's not the happy ending I used to dream of, but it's real. It's mine.